What's up? This is Nick Neutronz. I am a producer of hip-hop, melodic, trap, EDM, ambient music, R&B, all styles of broken beat. In this particular lesson, we're going to go around my template session and I'm going to show you all the things that I use to make my workflow specific to me and also to save me time. So starting in the top left-hand corner and going clockwise. I have my default tempo set to 100 beats per minute. That's kind of like where my central tempo heartbeat is at. A lot of mid-90s and early 2000s New York hip-hop records and pop records sit at that tempo. Going to the right, I have key mapped for my Ableton Live session. I've got my session record, my automation, and my record button and my MIDI overdub are all mapped so that anytime I want, I can just punch in and punch out really easily using my QWERTY keyboard. Highly recommend mapping an empty key on your keyboard to certainly the record button, but any other of these keys up here in the transport that you need to map them. Cool. All right. Moving on to the channels, I have my favorite drum rack, which contains an infinity rack for the kick, snare, hi-hats, and a kind of secondary future-based dubstep snare. And snare too, these are snares with like really crazy textures and long tails. Then the rest of these samples are just samples that over the years, I've used these samples tons of times. There's a bunch of 808 snares and claps that I can use for build-ups, fills, some toms that I use a lot. All the kind of regular sounds that I use in my production history are inside this rack. And then I got up to 128 kicks, snares, and hi-hats in these, which we will discuss in the next lesson. I have a bass rack, which is 2 layers of operator. I got one for the click and one for the tail, and a whole bunch of effects that come after the tail. And then I've got my favorite synthesizer right now, which is X for Records Serum, and I've got an instrument rack for that. So I can change the filter, I can change the wave shape, I can make a filter decay. All the kind of top level controls for sound design are inside this instrument rack. Then I have my favorite piano keyboard right now, Omnisphere's Play Me Forever. This is a great expressive keyboard. We're going to get into why I love that in a later lesson. And then I have a group of sound effects, a kind of white noise sweep that falls from top to bottom using analog, and it also has top level macro controls. I've got a rising FM noise sweep that I made in Operator. I got a reverse crash that loops every 8 bars. And then I've got a kind of trappy crash from the Lex Luger kit from 10 years ago. Then I also got an empty audio channel if I want to record audio. Then moving on to my returns, I've got a room reverb with OTT. I've got a hall reverb with OTT. I've got an echo with OTT. And I have an amp return, so if I want to just brighten the sound and just make it punch through the mix, I can just use this descend right here to just immediately send it to the amp and get a bright sound immediately. I've also set the amp to have dual output so I can make a stereo sound be wide. By default, this amp is mono. So that is all the channels and returns. Now moving on to the master. I have a DJ effect where I can high pass, low pass. I have beat repeater with pitch decay. And then I've got a washout reverb. This is kind of like Endless Smile, if you know that plugin. And then I've got a gain knob. I've got a bit reducer / cut-o-matic that can do a really crazy choppy redux effect. And then I have fade to gray, which is a washout delay. Then I've got a bypassed mono utility, so I can just check a mix in mono immediately. Then I've got the Aggressive Dance Master. This is a preset for mastering in Ableton. It's a real quick way to either check how my track will sound mastered if my levels are good for mastering, or sometimes I even just use this. This is a really, really effective chain, and Ableton's giving it to you for free in the presets. It's kind of warm. If you want a really clean, cold master, this might not be the best one, but a lot of the times it works really well. And now, lastly, on the master here, I've got a spectrum analyzer. If I want to check the frequency of any sound in my session, I can just solo it and play it and look at the master and see exactly what frequencies are in the sound that I've selected. Cool, so now that we've worked our way around my session and I've shown you all the ways that I've used my session template to improve my workflow, in the next lesson, we're gonna talk about getting the kicks and snares in there and using these infinity racks to build quickly.